Good evening and welcome by Radboud Reflects. My name is Chille Tempels and I'll be your moderator this evening. And this evening we'll be talking about how we can work towards a more sustainable future. Because, well, in the face of global pollution, climate change, enduring pandemics, you might, well, think there's little reason for hope. But that's not the case, or at least that's not the case according to the Swedish oncologist and sustainability expert Karl-Henrik Robèrt. He has developed a framework for sustainable development. He started an NGO, The Natural Step, a platform where people can work together, governments, NGOs and firms, to work towards a more sustainable society. And tonight we will talk to him because he would have been here this week. This week he receives an honorary doctorate at Radboud University. Normally he would have been present in this theater hall, but now he will call in via Skype and we will engage in a conversation with him. I will do so together with Professor of Environmental Philosophy Mark Davidson and Mariënburg, CSR expert and Program Director of Sustainability at Radboud University. And also joining is Linda Carton. She's a spatial planner at Radboud University and she has prepared a digital question that we will also pose to Karl-Henrik Robèrt. So what we will do is enter a conversation with Professor Robèrt and afterwards there will be room for questions. And you can ask questions via Mentimeter. You can go to www.menti.com and you can enter the code 6624539. Then you can pose a question and in the last 15 minutes of our program I will skim through these questions and ask a couple and post them to Professor Robèrt. That being said, we'll now move to a word of welcome that was recorded by our Rector Magnificus, Han van Grieken, and then we'll engage in a conversation with Professor Robèrt. I bid you all already a very nice evening.
Welcome to this online meeting hosted by Radboud Reflects. I'm happy to introduce to you Karl-Henrik Robèrt. Karl-Henrik Robèrt is an oncologist, but also a frontrunner in the field of sustainability. About 30 years ago, he founded the Natural Step framework, which has major impact until today all over the world. I'm proud to announce to you that on October 15, he will receive an honorary doctorate of Radboud University. Due to the corona pandemic, he will not be able to join us that day. There will be a live stream, however, that can be viewed by all of you, and I'm inviting you to do so. For now, I'm expecting a very interesting evening with Karl-Henrik Robèrt. My warmest regards to you.
Hello, Professor Robèrt. Very nice that you are with us this evening. You cannot see this, but there are, well, given the corona measures, there are still quite a lot of people in this room. So they are watching physically with us here. And together with my colleagues, Mariënburg and Mark Davidson, who you already met, we will engage in a conversation about your ideas, about how we can challenge or take on all these sustainability issues that lie in front of us. So, yeah, I think let's go for it.
Thank you so much. I'm honored and happy and proud.
Good. Well, then let's start. So, the first question I would like to start with is more or less of a personal question, I think. Because when I was reading up on you, I thought, whoa, he's a sustainability expert. And then I noticed that you have a background in medicine, in oncology. And then I was thinking, how does one move from oncology to becoming this, well, world-renowned sustainability expert?
Well, my sustainability interest was derived from childhood when I was worried about destruction of my play yard, actually. I could watch how the destruction went on, paving my play yard and the meadows and forests and building skyscrapers there instead. And I remember how I was thinking about what would eventually make them stop and then live happily ever after. Then, as I grew older, my worries actually deepened. And when I eventually became a cancer scientist and cancer doctor, I made a few observations there at the hospital, at the university hospital and the cancer unit that I was leading. One was how wonderful people are when they come with their cancer diseased children by their hands. There is absolutely no limit to how much pain a normal Swede, and I'm sure it's the same in your country, is prepared to undergo when it is about saving your children into the future. Another observation was that the same species, being that wonderful, seem to destroy the habitat of their own children for the future and making doctors like myself helpless in the long run. Another observation was that when I began to attend seminars and workshops, it turned out that there were so many brilliant minds around, but each of them were working in silos or drill holes, each working on their bits and pieces. And there's nothing wrong with that. We need to focus and become deep in different issues. But the problem was that there was no connection between them. There was no unifying framework by which they could make use of all the smart things that were going on deep down in those drill holes. So what I intended to do was to ask the leading scientists at the time in Sweden advice. Eventually I had raised interest in 65 of them to come about with a consensus process and then ship it to all Swedes, every Swedish household and every school. And it was formatted as a picture book and an audio cassette with a very beloved speaker voice in Sweden talking to that picture book. And I managed to raise the money and it was shipped to all Swedes, and the name of it was The Natural Step. The framework did not exist in the early days of this. It was just a big picture, and it was a promise amongst those scientists to continue the discourse, the dialogue, and to reach further and further towards a framework that could eventually be used by leaders. But we didn't have it at the time. What we could publish, though, was what we agreed on: the big picture of unsustainability, the big picture of how good it would be for everyone if we could solve it together, and then the worst parts of unsustainability. We could agree on that. And that was unique in Sweden at the time. The mass media debate was all, and the discourse in Sweden, the political discourse, was all about controversy, debate about details instead of seeking that big unifying framework.
Right.
And the truth is that this has been going on since then. And the framework has been systematically refined in cooperation between scientists and policymakers and business executives ever since.
So what you're saying is that you found this coalition in the end, but to me it seems, you said, well, we weren't able to agree on sustainability at the start, but we were able to find some kind of consensus on unsustainability. So,
well, in a way you're right, but sustainability was not a relevant term until mankind began to make the world unsustainable. So sustainability is semantically derived from unsustainability. It begins with unsustainability.
And then what are the main unsustainable threats you noticed when you started working on this? Well,
the problem is very similar to how it was with cancer at the time when I was active. We were in cancer when at the time when we were helpless and all patients with disseminated disease died, everyone died, and there were myriad symptoms. They died from fatigue, anemia, pains, bumps, weight loss. It were myriad symptoms, and we tried to treat all the symptoms, but we didn't understand the upstream cause of the disease, the root cause. Yeah. And that is exactly what we see today. Now the patient is our unsustainable civilization and organizations gradually dying from the deadly disease unsustainability. And instead of talking about the upstream causes, the root causes of the disease, we try to fix symptoms downstream. And that was certainly the case at the time when I initiated and founded the Natural Step. And the framework we have derived since then is there not to replace any of the elegant frameworks and tools and concepts developed by my scientific colleagues. It's there to increase their value by putting them together into cohesion for strategic decision making.
Mm-hmm. And so this might be kind of a question, a practical question, but how do you do this? If all these people are in their own niches, pillars, working, I mean, it's very hard for people maybe in management studies to talk with a chemist or an ecologist. So how does this work?
That was exactly like it was in cancer when we tried to fix symptoms. So we tried antibiotics, and we tried transfusions, and we tried cytostatics, and we tried this and that, and all patients died. And then eventually the definition of the root cause of cancer was derived. It's a monoclonal disease. It means that it is derived from one single crazy stem cell that propagates itself into future generations, sustaining that same flaw of DNA and eventually threatening the whole patient. And as soon as that was known, and it wasn't known, the first half of the 2nd century we didn't, but when it was known, the definition of cancer cure upstream in cause-effect chains was on the table. There in the future, when the patient is cured, we have managed to comply with 2 principles. 1, we have killed the last cancer stem cell. Number 2, but we have not killed the patient. And we must obviously manage both. And this made it possible across those drill holes or silos for pathologists, radiologists, radiotherapists, surgeons, toxicologists, and so forth to cooperate to cure patients. And today we cure well above 50%. And when it comes to children, we cure well above 90%. And this is because we have a shared mental model of how to define cancer cure. And then there are different strategies, routes to get there, but we never question the boundary conditions for cancer cure. It's the same in football. And you ought to know, because you have a beautiful national team in your country that we fear a lot in my country. And again, there are 2 boundary conditions of winning, and they're always the same. Follow the rules, and number 2, make the ball come into the other goal more often than you receive it in your own. And it's always the same. If you, for instance, throw the ball into the other goal, it doesn't count. In chess, you have 4 principles of checkmate. Every game is like that. Every complex endeavor is like that. You can't look into the future, but you can define success. And as soon as you can define success, you can gradually ensure that you get there. And every bit of exciting things that take place on the playfield in football is done by players, the referee, the audience. Everybody has exactly the same idea of winning, and that creates the excitement of the game. Who would otherwise pay a ticket to look at grown-ups playing with a ball?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. So therefore we need to have this mutual understanding of both our goal and the rules.
Yeah, and in complex systems, its boundary conditions is a basic principle definition of what you want. And that was lacking when I began developing it. And the Natural Step was just an organization. It was an NGO. The framework in scientific literature is called Framework for Strategic Sustainable Development, FSSD. You can hardly say it, so most people call it the Natural Step Framework just because of the NGO that I founded. Yeah.
So we can use this framework, but then I still wonder, so you can think about the rules, these rules, but I was also wondering, you refer in your work to the basic mechanisms of destruction, I think. This sounds like these very gloomy and doomy threats we are facing, but I think it's essential to address them, and also maybe for the people here to kind of get a grasp of what these threats are.
Yeah, well, They are the basic mechanisms of destruction when it comes to ecosystems are very easy to understand. The first one is that we allow a net input of matter from the Earth's crust, which were originally in ores, in mines below in the Earth's crust. We dig it up and then we use it in a dissipative way, in a wasteful way, so that we get gradual increases of waste, pollution, like CO2 causing climate change, or cadmium increases in soils and in our kidneys causing kidney problems, or silver causing problems in root threads and fish. So we are allowing matter from the Earth's crust to increase systematically. But we are also allowing chemicals to increase systematically, like CFCs and DDT and dieldrins and freons and phthalates and chlorparaffines and bromine organic anti-inflammables and so forth and so on. The list is endless. Mm-hmm. And final way of destruction, upstream in cause-effect chains, is that we remove natural systems by putting asphalt on it or far too large clear cuts, whereafter the wind erosion takes care of the rest and create from a forest, it becomes a desert. So we have desertification, we have pollution by two different mechanisms. Now, if a company understands this, or if a municipality understands this, they can ask themselves, where are we in the future when we don't contribute to the first mechanism, the second mechanism, and the third mechanism? Mm-hmm. And in line with your question, this might be like a negative phraseology. Why do you put it in the negative? Don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. And the reason is that that is much more engaging, stimulating, wonderful. Could you imagine a boss with a new employee, and he receives the employee and say, for as long as you don't do this, that, and this, you can do whatever you like. And I want your brain to just spur along those lines for as long as you don't do those things. And the other alternative is the CEO saying, welcome to my company. You are allowed to do that, that, and that, which actually means that that's what you're allowed to do and nothing else. So when it comes to creativity and innovation, negative constraints act in a stimulative way.
Yeah, okay, I see. So maybe I should be a bit more hopeful and a bit more optimistic.
Yeah, well, it's I don't know. I don't know if we are optimists or pessimists. I want to regard myself as a realist. Mm-hmm. I don't think we are looking ahead of dance on roses. But what I do feel is that it is very, very much nicer to work like this with people. It is much more engaging. They get going. They get more active. Mm-hmm. And this goes on at the same time as destruction goes on. So it's like a sort of chicken race between good things growing faster than the bad things. But the bad things are still very dominating all over. But the good things are growing faster and faster, actually exponentially. And that looks very nice in itself. How it will go in the end, my guess is no better than anybody else's. But I know that it's very nice to cooperate with people like this, understanding what you are going to do together. It's much nicer than being confused.
I agree. Yeah. So I think it's nice to maybe dive a bit further into what firms can do and what companies can do. And I think, Mark, you had a question.
Yes.
About that.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'm honored to be able here to ask you some questions about your great work. And my first question relates to your idea expressed in your work that there is a business case for sustainability. It's in the interest of companies themselves to change their ways and produce sustainably. And that particularly interests me. In a previous life, I used to be a consultant, also trying to persuade companies to change their ways in a sustainable direction, and it always turned out, in my experience, to be difficult because they're always so profit-minded and they could not understand that there is any profit, real profit in sustainability. So my question to you is, could you elaborate more on why there's really a business case for companies? Is that because it's really profitable, whatever the rest of society does? Or is it because they anticipate future demand from society. Could you elaborate on it?
Yes, of course. And this is also published. If anybody would be interested, it is published at depth in a paper which is about the prisoner's dilemma, which is a very dangerous and misleading concept, by the way. Anyhow, the key element of understanding the business case is the funnel. You know, the funnel is something you can use if you pour water into something and you need to make it narrow in so that you can make the water, for instance, being poured into a bottle. And the funnel, the wall of the funnel, represents a dynamic deterioration of the situation globally. So as long as we get fewer and fewer forests, lower and lower purity in nature, lower and lower biodiversity, everything gets worse and worse and worse as we get going into the future. This is like a funnel. And the funnel wall represents the degrees of freedom, the degrees of survival potential of the whole system. Now, once that is understood, the dynamic challenge to business, the next comes more or less naturally. If you ask them a few rhetoric questions, do you at Nike or Electrolux or IKEA or Philips, will you be completely out of this problem, or do you share it with everyone else? Well, what do you mean? Of course we share it. We are in this funnel together. Okay. So next question, do you think that markets will change them as we keep losing resources and purity in the whole system? And they are not dumb. They realize the market will change, and it will change faster and faster. And the reason is that we are now talking about survival issues. And survival issues are very convincing in the end. So they suddenly sense that there will be a pressure on us to come up with innovative solutions to those problems, and the pressure to derive those solutions to the market will increase, and they will increase fast. So the trick to get them listening is the funnel. It's a very, very powerful argument to them. And I have never experienced once, not even in the most aggressive business culture like in the United States, where you get sued if you don't earn that last dollar for your stock market or the stock owners. I haven't experienced once that the business executive has said, no, we get more and more fertile forests and cropland, and diversity is going in the other direction. They don't even try to go down that route. So they see the funnel. And if you ask them, are you in this in any way? And they say, yeah. And then suddenly the case is there. Now they tell you, well, how much in a hurry are we? And then you tell them the big thing is, that's up to you. It's you. As long as you see the risk, and the risk is increasing, it's up to you when you decide to move. So if they do it right, even if we are on Titanic, even say as a hypothesis, as a figure of speech, that we are doomed in the end, we will hit the iceberg and go under. If you are doing this right, not too fast, because then you don't get return on investment, but not too slow, because then others will beat you at it. They will be ahead of you. So if you do it at the right pace, you're a winner, regardless what the others do. It means that even if we are on Titanic, you will run first class on the journey, whereas the others will have really lousy journeys because it will be more and more expensive. They will lose more and more money, and that is for sure. But you don't tell them how fast, that's up to them. And then we have designed a creative framework by which they can be innovative around that idea.
So I assume that to follow this framework, the industry or the organizations need more or less a long-term perspective. In your experience, is it more the larger companies that are able to develop this long-term perspective, or is it not connected to size?
Well, yeah, yes and no. First of all, we are all in this, SMEs and large companies alike. We're all in the funnel. So the game is pretty much the same. However, it's a bit easier to reach out for big companies because they very often have a science department, and they can very often afford to think anew and so forth. Whereas SMEs, some of them maybe have 2 employees and they can't even spend an hour to listen. So they have certain problems. On the other hand, the small companies are more mobile. They can move faster than the big dinosaurs. So my experience is that it works as well with smaller companies, but they have a bit different challenges. Then the other point I want to make is that the framework manages the problem that you addressed, Mark, with the long-term perspective. It goes like this. The challenge is to earn money now in a way that can be developed to earn money also tomorrow and the day after and the day after in this funnel. So if you have a number of investment opportunities, you should choose the ones that is good for money now and opens doors to the future, being possible to develop further towards compliance with the sustainability principles. And that is a game they can be trained to play very, very well, I would say. Philips, for instance, did it, challenged by Eindhoven, where Philips had its head office at that time. And Eindhoven did a phenomenal work, gradually moving in this direction. And eventually, and they were eventually introduced to this game by Philips. So the top management of Philips had asked themselves, do we have a place in the future in that funnel? Can you even imagine an attractive future without Philips and electronics managed in a modern and elegant way in line with those principles? And the answer was no. So the rest is, how do we then gradually develop Philips in this direction? And eventually they merged the innovative team together with the sustainability team, and then turned to Eindhoven, the city of Eindhoven, and the mayor there, and convinced them to do the same. So it actually began with business and moving further to politicians. And it is a stepwise approach. So it's not either long-term or short-term, it's both.
Thank you.
Do you want to follow up on this?
I have many questions.
Yeah.
I assume, or my intuition tells me, but also theory, that to arrive at a more sustainable society, we also need more cooperation. And also in your own work, you emphasize the importance of when certain companies start, you get synergy if they cooperate with other companies.
Yes.
And you also stated in your work, you already mentioned something about the prisoner's dilemma, this wrong idea that this social dilemma that we all shift our costs to others, and that is, in the end, people think only about themselves. So my question is a bit larger, that over the last 20 years, a bit the political system in the world, or especially in the Western world, is changing, more neoliberal political thought. And the essence of neoliberalism is the idea that the best organizing principle for society is competition. So my question to you, do you think this is does it help, this idea of competition, to get towards sustainability? Or do you think this political move over the last decades makes our work more difficult?
I think that neoliberalism is a really bad problem, but not necessarily primarily through competition, because in this funnel, you actually want the proactive ones working systematically towards the opening of the funnel, being part of the solution in the system, and thereby gaining market shares. You want them to compete the others. You want them to strike them out of the system. Those who don't want to pay attention, get rid of them and buy competition from the other ones. But later on, we need a more cooperative economy, and that is already developing as you and I speak. We see more and more examples of more cooperative strategies. For instance, in cooperation in supply chains and supply chain management. And product service systems is another term that goes even wider, where suppliers and clients and even politicians and financial institutions can begin to cooperate to derive what will be asked for in the markets in the future for survival reasons. And they can do it relatively early on because they cooperate with a much larger impact. So we see this happening, but it's still a little competitive edge in there. The main problem with neoliberalism is not that, but the flawed ideas of economy per se. They believe that everything will take care of itself through economic means, and the economy is only one piece of means. We have other means like information, knowledge, indicators outside of the economic systems that also are needed. So there are so many more things than the economic system, which in our neoliberal world has played out such that it kind of degrades humanity. But that is not about competition. That's not the main problem with it. It's the economic, like a goddess of economy running the show, which is a flaw in itself.
Clear. Thank you.
So I think it might be nice to, in the Netherlands we have all kinds of firms even embracing your approach. I think in our very own province there's Interface. They make these tiles and they made the whole process has become circular. I think, Mariah, you had a question about how you could motivate people to do this.
Yes, Professor Robèrt. In the first place, I want to thank you for your contribution, both in theory and practice, to sustainable development. I've met Interface. I've visited Interface a couple of times before, and also other companies working from this strategic sustainable development point of view. I was wondering, is this enough, this vision, to motivate the employees, the people within companies? Because often they have to change their behavior. They also lose something with it. Not everyone likes change and new ambitions. What's your vision on that? And do you maybe have an example of how this has worked in practice, a company who succeeded in engaging their people?
I think we could stay a little while with Interface. I think it's a good example. I was once, many years ago, I was invited by the founder of Interface, Roy Anderson, over to the United States. And he had been engaging with sustainability ideas for long. And his fellow peers and colleagues on the business arena thought that he was very strange. But he didn't actually tell them what he was thinking about. He was just a bit different. And then after a while, as he put it himself, he came out. He came out as a sustainability propaganda CEO, talking about himself as a thief and a plunderer, destroying the world and so forth. So he was definitely different. And then he managed to paint a picture, a vision to his employees, which he called or referred to as the top of Mount Sustainability. And they were going to climb it together. And the togetherness was the big deal here. So people got goosebumps when he was speaking, because he was a leader that wanted to combine business with doing something good for all of civilization. And that did not in itself cause any resistance in anybody. On the contrary, they were excited to learn how he intended to do it. And then he told them that we are going to move there stepwise. We are going to earn money all the way there, but we will make sure that each investment will bring us one step further, and then we will use that new platform. Would you like us to do that in excitement together? And again, the answer was yes. So in response to your question, it is about dynamic leadership as well. In the concrete business case, which is also successfully run in the Netherlands in Interface, we call this the ABCD process. A is the top of Mount Sustainability. It means a future for Interface where it complies with the basic principles of sustainability. It doesn't violate them anywhere. B is where are our challenges today in that context? And C is, what optional measures are there? And they make a long list of possibilities, and then they prioritize amongst those. And then they meet again, they convene again and do another ABCD, where the previous decisions are now put under B because they have done it. And then that creates a new line of possibilities, and then they talk about that. And eventually the process is an iterative one where they systematically climb that Mount Sustainability. So for carpets, they decided to calculate what it would cost to create a carpet that would comply completely with all the principles. And there was no way this could be marketed. It was far too expensive. Then they did a recalculation at the next ABCD workshop to divide it into squares. And the idea was that if you put that in an area, only the tiles in the corridors between furniture are worn, but the other ones located under tables and sofas and chairs will not be worn. So then you only need to recycle the ones that are worn. And then they did the math again, and it was still too expensive. Then they did another ABCD workshop where they calculated the possibility to market it through a leasing system, and then they could calculate a profit doing it. So then they launched it, but then they found a new problem in the next ABCD workshop, because the carpet tiles in the corridors were new and they looked different in color in comparison to the ones that were not recycled. So now they did an organic texture and picture on each tile that made that impression vanish. So now it looked organic and even more beautiful. And now they had a perfect thing to market. So it is the iterative, systematic process, never believing that it will be easy, but never giving up either.
Yeah, that's a nice example, very beautiful example. I can imagine this you need a lot of creativity then in these workshops, and also a pluralistic group of people from...
Very nice,
yeah.
Exactly that. And the thing is that, like in the cancer example, if pathologists and surgeons and medical doctors and all of those, they are in their silos and they are experts, if they have a shared mental model of what they would like to accomplish together, it's very inspirational to be listened to, because then you say, you haul up a solution from your sleeve, deep down in my drill hole, I have found this. Well, that's similar to mine, but I have found this. And suddenly people are talking in a very elegant and dynamic fashion, in an innovative fashion together. And it's much more fun to work like that.
Yeah.
So I couldn't agree more. And again, it's about negative constraints. That's much more stimulating. It's a bit like in music. You don't violate the laws of harmony in music. And if you share that, you can even jam together. You can be creative, you can innovative together, play together and enjoy the music, because none of the musicians violate the laws of harmony in music. And then that is freedom.
Yeah.
Versus the slavery of mediocrity, to be stuck in what you did before.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
It seems like when you talk about the example of interface, captains of industry have a lot, can make lots of changes. At the same time, though, I have to think about an example for the Netherlands again. There was the CEO of Unilever, Polman. He had sustainability was like #1 on his agenda, but a lot of his programs they initially started full of motivation and they did a lot. But then at a certain moment, the shareholders knocked on his door and said, hey, what about our revenues? So I was wondering what you thought about that. To what extent can these CEOs really take the lead, or are their hands also bound by more structural constraints or more practical constraints, like these shareholders?
Yes, they are. So that certainly surfaces on the B list of challenges today all the time. What shareholders expect and what they know, because they very often don't have the knowledge to appreciate what the top management team launches as a way forward.
Yeah.
So the name of the game, also for other reasons that hold progress back, is to earn money from the old stuff at the same time as you learn how to make the new stuff, to be more proactive, sticking out for the future markets. And then when the change comes, and when it does, it very often goes very fast. Paradigm shifts come so fast so that when you experience them, they are very often over already. The companies who have then begun training in due time then get a competitive advantage immediately, whereas the ones who need to think anew have very, very expensive problems with fire brigading. For instance, Electrolux was the first company in the world launching refrigerators without CFCs in them, without putting something else that would violate the sustainability principles. They were very innovative about it. And then they earned money, small scale, from the new innovations where they found such markets. And then when there was this Montreal Protocol and CFCs were forbidden, they had already practiced, not only made the innovations in line with what you were talking about, but they were actually there doing it already. And then they could exploit the production volumes fast, whereas Whirlpool and Bosch and the others were left behind, and it cost them a fortune. And Leif Johansson, who was the CEO of Electrolux at the time, told me that they earned billions from being ahead of the game in this way. So they didn't solve the problem overnight. They solved it in their brains. They did it stepwise, launching new proactive models and production lines while earning money for a bit more of the old stuff. And then when the change came, they were prepared for it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. I was wondering, maybe. So, okay. Do you think that this framework that you have developed, would it be applicable to all industries?
Yeah.
Or are there industries that are maybe essentially unsustainable?
That's a very, very good question. And let's take nuclear power.
That was the one example that was in the back of my mind. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any way for nuclear power to be sustainable, to comply with the sustainability principles? And the answer is no. It's physically impossible. From laws of nature, it's completely impossible to envision a future for nuclear power. However, a nuclear power plant, do they know anything about energy? Yeah. Do they sell energy? Yeah. They don't sell split atoms. Nobody wants to buy them anyhow. They sell energy, right? Do they know anything about complex energy systems and the complex energy market? Yeah, they do. That's what they do. Do we need that kind of competence in the future funnel? And the answer is yes. So how could they then stepwise move to other things, other possibilities? And in one power plant in Sweden, they moved from selling more and more nuclear power to more and more management competence with regard to risk management of waste and stuff, because we have waste from the nuclear power we have already run for many, many years. And they then switched to risk management of waste and waste streams to enter that market. And while earning money for a while on nuclear power and gradually declining on the other stuff. Then politicians began to shut down by violence nuclear power plants. So the ones who had then foreseen this change were happy that they did. And the others were left too long and with huge costs for shareholders and others.
So if I understand you correctly, you would say, well, there are certain practices or products that are essentially unsustainable, but as a firm, you can, of course, change.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly, because you have employees that are smart, brilliant, but so you have to reshape your business ideas and your assumptions what can fly tomorrow in that funnel on the market.
Yeah.
That must be changed. But if you do, and if you do it in an innovative way, as it were, you can still come out as a winner.
Yeah, yeah. So that's that. So in regard to that, so let's imagine there's a company that is unwilling to do so, and this is a question from the audience. They say, well, imagine such an unwilling nuclear firm. Should it be forced by government, for instance, towards sustainability? Do you think that's a viable solution?
Well, we have developed a framework for how to be smart. If you gradually earn money from the old stuff while developing the new that must come from laws of nature, it can be decided it must come as an opportunity on the market. If you do that, what will happen? Number one, we will get more proactive companies. Number two, we will get a higher number of successful proactive companies. My worst nightmare are good guys wanting to do good, but doing the wrong thing for the right reason. That's really bad. We can't afford to lose good guys. We need to increase the opportunities for good guys. And then when the good guys begin to develop spear points into the future, politicians wake up and say, what do you mean? That is impossible. Look at those guys. They are doing it. And then politicians can come after them and become sharper and sharper, developing harsher and harsher politics and economic means and so forth to support the newcomers. So, and that is very often how paradigm shifts occur. It's innovative people amongst citizens. It's innovative businesses. And then the new thing suddenly exists. Yeah. And then politicians come in and shape the rules accordingly. Some people get angry with politicians because they come in late. But I don't think it's that bad, because the alternative is dictatorship, when politicians move in before anybody else and say, I don't care what you think or what you want, this is the rule. So in a way, it is a democratic thing that proactivity eventually moves to politics rather than the opposite way around. And we see it all the time now when it comes, for instance, to electrifying the energy systems and the traffic systems. It goes so fast.
Mm-hmm. To draw a bit more on politics, Linda Carton had a question that was exactly about that. So we'll briefly play it, and then I'm curious what you think of her question.
Okay.
Hello, Radboud Reflects. Good evening, Mr. Karl-Henrik Robèrt. My name is Linda Carton, and I'm a scientist in spatial planning at Radboud University. And I appreciate the opportunity to ask a question. Now, I teach my students some 10 years now about the natural step approach, or the framework for strategic sustainable development. And every year I show them a little piece of the TEDx talk in a video to show my students your explanation directly. And I especially appreciate the interdisciplinarity, the synergies, and the simplicity and therefore communicative power of your guiding principles and your methodology. And I admire the future-orientedness of the approach, and it makes my students more creative and imaginative, thinking about alternative long-term futures, and then do backcasting and reasoning back to little steps that can be taken today to design this long-term future. Now my question is this: what happens when local long-term values that are included in good cities of visions of cities and regions come into conflict with state-level short-term interests? For instance, when the city of Nijmegen wants to make stricter rules for air pollution than the state, or when the state treasury is depending on income from gas extraction in the province of Groningen. Especially on topics like climate action, CO2 neutral cities and regions, and clean air, I see local regional governments struggling with outdated legal rules on higher government levels. How can the natural step approach be applied to help overcoming the stagnation or the wait-and-see attitudes in dialogue and negotiations, when long-term, future-oriented visions on local levels are not in sync with short-term interests, rules and structures on national levels? I'm curious about your ideas on this spatial planning and politically oriented question. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I love this question. It's phenomenal and it's heads on, it's spot on. The thing is that municipalities play a very, very central role in the transition. Actually, we know this already in the second Rio conference, 92 in Rio de Janeiro, where it was stated that the key player is the local government, is the municipality. And the reason is simple to understand. Central establishments, central organizations are very much about ideologies, where people are defending right-wingers and left-wingers, and they have their preset ideologies. Whereas on the local government, the right-winger and the left-winger look at the same problem, the same garbage dump, for instance, and you approach them as a scientist and tell them that due to the laws of matter conservation, matter cannot disappear. And they say, we have suspected that for years, and so suddenly it's so easy to arrive at consensus from a scientific point of view, and it's much easier to have them cooperate. But now we are reaching a dilemma. We just learned that if the long-term laws from the central establishment is in conflict with what the local government wants to do, then we really have a problem. How can we deal with it? There are other problems on the B list, if you remember the ABCD approach. There are other problems as well. One of my PhD students have shown that most local governments are organized also in silos. So you have this sector and that sector and this sector, and they are not cohesive with regard to shared mental models of what success would be like, which weakens them. It weakens them in the eyes of the central establishment, that they do not come out as powerful. And furthermore, they don't come out together in many municipalities. But there are examples when they do, they can become very powerful. For instance, there is even an example in the United States where above 200 mayors agreed on running in the face of the central government's opposition to climate change and the laws around climate change and negotiations about climate change. They went straight against the White House by merging forces and creating networks. So I guess my answer to the question is that you have that problem, you have other problems too, but by addressing them and then being creative in togetherness about solutions, and then sharing, expanding the scope, including more municipalities and local governments in this case, like Tuan Smith did along the river Rhine Delta, where many municipalities were cooperating and sharing an idea of increased resilience in the eyes of climate change and doing so sustainably. That is a way of empowering people. Still, the problem is there. I don't have a quick solution. I'm just saying that if you apply a systematic approach, that empowers people more to do something about problems, whatever the problem is. We also have examples of this in Sweden. We have examples of how local governments are convincing authorities to engage in ABCD workshops together with them. So the authorities from central governments are invited into workshops, into local government workshops, taking part in the ABCD workshop, learning on site from the problems the local government is confronted with, which again empowers them in the eyes of authorities. So there are ways of coming around it, but I don't have any quick fix. Just saying that, again, the framework works also in those occasions.
We're already moving very fast during this evening, so time's flying by. There's one final topic that we definitely should address as a university, and then I give the floor to you, Maya.
Thank you. Yes, this interesting conversation with you gives us the opportunity to ask you, what role should universities play in sustainable development, and then especially what could be the role of interdisciplinary research, or at least the different scientific disciplines that are in our university, at Radboud University. Maybe.
Thank you so much
yep.
for asking that, and I can sense that you would be excellent to respond to the question yourself. I can hear that from the way you ask it. It would be an excellent response. But I'm the one getting the honorary doctorate now, so I will respond anyhow, of course. And my first knee-jerk is to say that we need science to sharpen our senses, because we don't see CO2 increasing in the atmosphere. We don't see cadmium increasing in soils and biota. We don't see biodiversity shrinking. We need scientific methods to sharpen our senses to see those impacts from unsustainability. That's the first answer. The second one is that once we have used science to sharpen our senses and come to grips with a number of impacts, we need science to discover the root causes of those myriad impacts that we have just described. And then we need science to launch smart universal frameworks to pull it all together, to tackle problems from upstream in cause-effect chains, where the complexity is manageable, not being too late downstream, because when we fix problems downstream, we very often do so by fixing one problem at the cost of inventing another problem elsewhere in the system. We need to go upstream to model our desirable futures and then go there strategically. So we need science for that reason as well. So what have we? We have one of the most proactive universities in the world, Radboud. And this university has recently decided to launch a new sustainability program. And then you have turned to me and giving me an honorary doctorate. And we have our common history of kinship and mutual respect. So my question is, what can stop us now? Let's continue to work like this together in togetherness.
Yes, we will. Thank you.
Maybe to follow up on that, one of the people from the audience is also wondering about this, and she or he asked, okay, what should our students and our citizens learn to be ready for this future? Do you have specific advice, maybe?
Well, I think that any field of expertise is needed in this journey, because as we have already pointed out, when it was about cancer treatment, we needed pathologists and surgeons and pharmacologists and nurses and social workers to cooperate around one and the same idea of winning, in this case, cancer cure. We need engineers from universities. We need medical doctors from universities. We need all kinds of expertise to cooperate around an attractive, sustainable world, complying with those principles. What we would need to complement traditional teaching with is that big picture, that universal big picture, to increase the value of each specific field and to make people and students able to explain what aspects of that drill hole or that silo could be helpful for the larger picture. And that does not always come easy in academic teaching. I remember when I was teaching and when I was learning chemistry as a medical doctor, I was afraid that I was too dumb to become a medical doctor, because I read the first chapters of that big chemistry book. It was so big that I could hardly carry it home from the bookstore. And when I had read 5 chapters, I began to forget the first one. And I wonder, how can I remember this thing? And then in some kind of despair, I really mean this, I really were worried about my own brain. A big map fell out of the book. There was a little pocket at the end, and it was a folded map. And when I unfolded it, it was a big map, and it was the citric acid cycle. It demonstrated how all the bits and pieces of chemicals were actually part in the body of creating a beautiful system where carbohydrates could become fats, and fats could become carbohydrates or proteins, and proteins could become carbohydrates or fats, depending on what the body needed. And this cycle was just beautiful, and you can see all the reaction steps in between. And suddenly everything was so clear. You understood everything. And that bloody thing had to fall out of the book. Nobody told us, no professor teaching his or her thing told us. It fell out of the bloody book. And it tells us something about that academic teaching sometimes is too specific, down deep in drill holes, instead of paying attention to how it all connects. And I think we need both. It's beautiful that we have experts focusing on detail, but not instead of paying attention to how it fits with the other parts of the system.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this. This was, I think, our very final question. I think for me, and maybe also for you and for the people watching, it was very inspirational. I think we all have found new ways to see how we can together work towards this more beautiful and sustainable system. So I want to thank my guest, Marië Klomp, Mark Davidson, but of course, especially you, Professor Karl-Henrik Robèrt, for being here tonight with us. And so thank you. And I think that deserves a round of applause.
Thank you indeed. Thank you so much. I could also have a small, very small final word. What I've been talking about now has been published recently in a big special volume of Journal for Cleaner Production. Numerous articles from around the world covering the arena of strategic sustainable development, showing the front line of this phenomenal field, which is so important, what to do about those things. And I created a little picture book where I selected a number of figures or slides and then a little text under each that I think Radboud will publish on his homepage or something. And I guess anybody could access it if you're interested to read about the sort of summary of what was in that big special volume. For those who don't like particularly to read scientific articles, it may sometimes be a bit difficult. But I have tried to make it as comprehensive and enjoyable as possible.
All right, so bear that in mind, the Journal of Cleaner Production and your special edition.
Yes.
I'm going to say goodbye to the people at home. Thank you so much for watching. Our apologies for the technical hiccups at the start of the program, but I'm very happy that you still all tuned in. If you like this evening, I can highly recommend you to also watch this Wednesday at 8 p.m., where Frank van Kaspel, philosopher at Radboud University, will interview our other honorary doctorate professor, Suha Kanj, and they will be talking about the silent pandemic of antimicrobial resistance. On Thursday, you can of course also join for the 97th Dies Natalis, the birthday party of our university. And you can watch their academic ceremony at a live YouTube stream of Radboud University. Thank you for watching, have a very nice evening, and I hope to see you again at Radboud Reflects.